and phantoms. We apologize for the hiccup there. We have no idea what happened. I mean, we have our guesses, but we don't know for certain what happened. Hopefully, the audio issues are fixed. I have Landon having the show pulled up. He's going to tell us hopefully if we have audio.
I hear
We
you.
don't know for certain what happened. Hopefully, the audio issues are fixed. What the hell is this?
That's crazy, dude.
Like I said, we have.
And you wonder why people,
Are concerned, yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, that very much is some Big Brother shiznit. Amazon, Daddy Amazon, does, to my knowledge, own Be Live, which is the program we're using. But yeah, man, that's really weird. I don't think that's ever happened to us. So I'm sorry that happened. But we were at the end.
That's what it's about, censorship, right? I mean, you've seen all the changes that have gone down with Twitter, with Musk stepping in and talking about some of these very things, about censorship. I would, who knows? And yeah, maybe there's some algorithms or things out there to just kind of automatically start shutting some of that stuff down.
I would assume that's what it was. I mean, I can't think of any other reason, but from one Big Brother conversation to the other, we did a really good show with you in the past, Jay, where we talked about you and your exit from the Mormon church. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And you and Landon both had exited churches. And I know that must be a super scary feeling, especially like Landon, because that was going to be his livelihood. Landon was in school. Landon, would you like to tell that story really quick, just so people sort of know?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much, I'll make it the very quick version here, but I pretty much grew up in the Church of Christ, and then I went to college to go become a youth and family minister is what I was in for. And that's really, the whole time growing up, I always had questions, but like things would always just kind of get deflected and said in a nice way to where you don't really question it. You're just like, oh, everybody believes this, okay? It was really when I got to college and I'm sitting in classes with professors, and I've always been this way in school. If something doesn't make sense, I'm like, wait, hold up, explain this, let it click for me. And so I happened to be that one in college in the class, always questioning everybody while everybody else is just saying yes, sir. So anyway, I just ultimately came to the point that I'm not convinced that a God exists. So that's kind of where I stand. Um, and I just don't see any good reason to believe in a God, to be honest with you. And that's kind of where I'm at. There's obviously some interesting things that happened over the years to get to that point too. But I don't really have a lot of animosity towards what really happened to me. But I see some very deceptive tactics that are used by different religions nowadays that ultimately are extremely harmful to people. And that's kind of where it really upsets me nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I what you just described there is similar, similar experience to what a lot of people go through, and their shelf breaking things that come up. I mean, my shelf had been cracked for a long time, and the more it cracks, and the more you start to contemplate or so-called pray about things and research and go down that rabbit hole, it cracks more, and eventually the shelf gives out, and you go down a different path, a different direction. And yeah, your story is very, very similar to mine, and of course, different same ideology, right? Christian but just different churches. And my experience is a little crazy, but at the same time, the thing that I've appreciated is being able to hear other people's experiences and what they've gone through to let me know that it's okay, and I'm not the only one out there that's experienced the something that I thought that I was doing alone. And so I think that's why I think it's good to share the information, and it's good to reflect and to have these types of conversations to let other people know that, when you're struggling with your own religion, with whatever religion you're a part of, that there's people out there that have gone through similar experiences that can help you get through the difficult times.
The last show that we did, I think people were very candid that a lot of folks, including all of us on the show, were very emotional by the end of it, and I don't think any of us were expecting that, right? And especially me, someone who hasn't been a part of an organized religion. It was a show that gave a lot of people hope, though. It made a lot of people feel normal, because you guys who were in these sort of religious organizations felt guilty for leaving. You felt guilty for doing what was best for you, because you had to worry about what was best for your family. And at the end of the day, you had to worry about, like, hey, am I going to end up in the good place when I'm gone? I mean, those are heavy sort of thoughts to have rattling around in your head. And let alone, Jay, you had a young family at the time of your exit. I mean, that must have been difficult for all 40 of you. I mean, God, there's too many to count.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing for me is you know I think with religion, some of the tactics that are used with whatever you're involved with, is that if you leave, or if you have doubts, that you're going to immediately experience unhappiness, or you're not going to be worthy to obtain something. And now that I've been out for, I think it's about 8 or 9 years now, maybe a little bit less than that. I don't worry about that. And one of the things I told both of you in our first podcast, the first show that we did, was that, sure, it might be rocky at first because of the unknown. I mean, I made a statement in the first show that I lived a lie for 40 something years of my life, right? And that's a heavy burden for an individual, and some individuals don't come out of it. I mean, they even destroy themselves
Yeah.
because of coming to the realization that they can't solve what's caught up in their head, or the way that they feel. Some people, I have family right now that are still very active in the church. They're the salt of the earth, and they believe a lot of the things that I've brought to them. And I don't actively go to,
Right.
try and get them or
Convert.
convince them to convert
Yeah.
them away from that. I feel like that's wrong. I feel like when anybody asks me about my experience and they want more details, the first thing I ask them is, are you happy with where you're at right now? Are you happy in your church? Do you believe, on the teachings of your church? And if they say yes, I say, conversation done. Don't
Yeah.
ask me that ever again.
Yeah.
Don't ask me that. But if you're coming to me for, my experience or advice, or want to talk about this because you're struggling in your life with certain concepts
Mhm.
or ideology, then yeah, let's have a conversation. You got to be ready for that conversation wherever it goes. And I'm not here to lead people away. I'm not anti Latter-day Saint or Mormon. I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
not, because listen, most of that community are good people. There's bad apples in any religious, you know, movement. There are good, great people. There's misguided people. So my experience isn't one that I openly share with everybody, when I come across an individual or anything. Like, I'm not broadcasting this. I'm not actively going out and trying to convince people that you're living a lie or anything like that. If you're happy with where you're at in your life, then do your thing. That's what life is all about, is being happy and coming up with something that's going to work for you and your family, or your salvation, however you want
Yeah.
to can take that. You know what I mean?
So let's sort of break it down for folks who maybe this is their first time tuning in. They didn't see the first show. Um, what what were the things that started to dwindle away at you? What were the first signs where you realized, hey, this might not be for me?
Like, so typically when you hear experiences like this, the members of any organization or religious community are going to try and find fault in the person that's sharing the experience. They're going to say, oh, well, he left or she left because of this, or they struggled with this. Listen, I'm human. I struggled with everything, right? It hadn't, my background, and just to kind of give you a little bit about who I was, my parents were converts to the church. My mother and my father were part of the Episcopalian community. My uncle is an active and minister for his church. Has probably 40, 40 years doing that. And that's both on my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family. That, same thing. So two ministers there, great people. And so, my parents were brought up under that religious belief and the Bible and Christianity, and they when they got married, they were young and they got married, and my dad got into the health spa business. He had a gym when they moved to Florida, and while they were there in Florida, my dad was a shareholder in this spa that they were running, and they had racquetball courts. They had all what a typical spa would have, and there was a young man there that was 16 years old at the time. His name was Craig Sims. And by the way, this conversion story was shared in the church's magazine. It was shared in the Ensign probably close to 30 years ago. So the church produced the conversion story of my parents. But what ended up happening is this gym rat that would come in to play racquetball was there every day, and my dad loved to play racquetball, and so he struck up a conversation with this kid, and my dad was very competitive, and this kid was putting a hurt on him at racquetball, and they became good friends. My dad was in his mid-20s. This kid was a young guy, and my dad would invite him out early in the mornings to play racquetball, and he said that he couldn't play. And my dad said, well, you're here every day. Why can't you just wake up early and come at that time? And the kid ended up sharing that he goes to early morning seminary. And my dad started asking about that, what does that consist of? And, this young kid who was a great guy, still is a great guy, was a great example to my parents, and invited the LDS missionaries over to the house. And they started taking the what they would call the discussions from the missionaries. And so two young 19-year-old kids came into the home and started preaching the gospel to them. And before you know it, they had him commit to baptism within the Mormon church. So both my mother and my father were baptized, and that was huge for both of their families. Like I said, all of my family, extended families from Long Island, New York. Some of them have branched out to West Virginia and stuff like that. So, a minister's son or a minister's, you get where I'm going. It's like, well, you're joining a cult, and back then there was very even little known about the LDS church within certain parts of the country. It wasn't as recognized as it is now. And so, there was fear that they would lose their families over joining this religion, right? Well, my parents had some crazy experiences while they were in Florida. He ended up, losing the spa business, and they said, well, and they had me. They had a young kid. They had myself. I was born in St. Pete's, and my sister was born 11 months later in Fort Myers. And they decided, you know what? Let's move out west. Let's move to Utah. He lost his business, came out west, and had an incredible story there. He became the top health insurance producer here in the state of Utah for several years, and was doing really well. And I was, they moved me out, I think, here when I was 2 years old. So I've been pretty much raised in Utah my whole life. So was my sister. And part of that story that I share is that there's a blessing that's given that can be given to members of the church called a patriarchal blessing. And it's basically a blessing that's given by a patriarch in the church, where they kind of talk about your lineage, things that God has planned for you in this life, and just some insight into maybe who you were in the pre-existence, what your purpose is here in this life, and it's more of like a guide to your spirituality as you're moving through this life. And my parents struggled to have kids. They had been trying for a while. They went to several doctors. Now, mind you, the technology back then was much different than it is now, but several doctors told them that, hey, you're not going to have any kids. The only way that you're going to have kids is by adoption. And it really weighed on my folks. And in their patriarchal blessing, it told them that they would have a beautiful family, that everything was going to be all right. And within a year, they had me. Sorry, not within a year, because I was already born, but it was close to that patriarchal blessing after they had been converted. And then, you know, they had me, and they had my sister, and then, so they took that as perceived as like, hey, God knows that, his plan, his direction for us. And they had these crazy stories that had been recounted to me and shared with me as faith building things. And so I was growing up, I was under the influence and the testimonies of my parents. My father was a bishop in the LDS church. So he held higher callings. He has a lot. Before his passing, I mean, he knew the brethren. I mean, my next door neighbor is President Eyring. He lives 3 houses down from me. In my ward was is one of the 12 apostles, and so, like, growing up, I was always around the high ups of the church. So um I was on board. But with, like, any teenager out there, you're going to listen to mom and dad, and you're going to lean on their testimonies. You can read scripture, you can go to church every Sunday, you can take the sacrament, and then as you get older and you start asking more complex questions and you really start to study that religion, when you have doubts and you're not getting the answers that you want, or that you're struggling in certain areas, you go to your leaders, right? You go to those leaders, and you want answers to questions. And when you struggle, and I told you in the first show, I struggled with what's called the word of wisdom in my teenage years. I partied through high school. I wasn't living the gospel standard, the LDS standard growing up. But people make mistakes, and I was honest. I'd go to my bishop and talk with to him, and confess those things with him, and get on plans to right wrongs. I've struggled with some of those things. So I'm by no means a perfect LDS Mormon, but, like, I grew up in the church, and I was a Sunday goer with my family. So was my sister, and it wasn't always by choice. It was either guilting me into going, or saying, you will go if you want to drive this weekend, or whatever. And so you eventually get to a point in your life where, I was at a point in my life, I was big into hockey, and I was trying to play in the NHL. That's all I wanted to do. I lived on skates, and when I had my injury, when I came back from Minnesota and knew that I was going to be playing in a juniors league and I was going to be brawling all the time with my position for like on a goon squad and not going anywhere and possibly give up my collegiate opportunities by taking pay. I was at a crossroads in my life, and this is where, I had just met Leslie, my wife of 26 years, and we became really, really close. And I was of that age where I'm 18, had just graduated. I'm getting into that 19-year-old mission time, for a young dude, male or female in the church that's active. The pressure to go and serve a Mormon mission where you do the same things that these young missionaries did with my parents with that conversion story that I just shared. I was at a crossroads where I was like, I was not ready to go to college, was not ready. I was still struggling with various things. And my wife, I knew one thing for sure, and that was I loved her. And she was my best friend. I spent every day with her. Sorry. she's amazing. She's been a champ. And listen, her story is similar in the sense that she grew up in the church, but she was a saint. I mean, she lived it to the T. I mean, she had mistakes, but she's an amazing woman. And when we met up and became friends, I looked at her one day and I was just like, I'm going to marry you. And she's like, no, you're not, unless you do the mission thing, because I don't want to be the chick that held you back from doing what you're supposed to do. And that's where things changed drastically.
Before we get into the mission, because I do want us to talk about the mission, it's probably my favorite part of the story. The mission is probably my favorite part of the story. You had already, as a teenager, sort of been rebellious against the church. You had already had questions that maybe weren't getting the answers that fulfilled you properly. So even as a teenager, 20 years before you would leave the church, it was already sort of planted in you. Is this what I want? It was something that your family was deep entrenched in, but you had had questions that maybe they didn't have, or you had had concerns that maybe they didn't have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I won't get into a ton of details because a lot of that is just religious text and stuff, and some of it, early on was just stuff that I have answers to now, that's not even really relevant, but that were a big deal to me at that time. And yeah, I had doubts. Everybody has doubts. I'm sure everybody in every religion has doubts, and one of them is just, I think the hardest part with religion is just having the faith to know the things that are obviously are unseen, God, for example, and as a young man, just like, coming up, it was always just in my mind, like, why would God, what's his purpose for me? What's the purpose of this life? And then, in my infancy in the church, it was like, well, why would God do these things? Why would he cause this stuff, to happen in people's lives and have people go through some terrible, terrible experiences? And listen, I'm over that. I got over that real quick in the mission because life isn't fair. And I think there are good things that come out of tragedies and difficulties. And I've raised my family just based on that. You can't go through life with everything being all gravy all the time,
And
but those are some of the things I struggled with as a kid. They weren't shelf breaking by any means where I was like, oh, I don't believe in the church or anything like that. But yeah, I had normal issues all the way up until the missionary experience.
And so this, of course, leads us to the missionary experience. Now, really quick, Landon, do you have any questions or anything before we go?
Yeah, I'll just comment. I think that, some of the stuff he's talking about and like the way that a lot of religions that we're more familiar with, getting getting people into them very young is part of their that's like their biggest retention tool, right? Get them in young, make them think this is it, make them all their friends, all their family, everybody be part of this. So there's a lot of people that are just not strong enough to walk away from that and
And
potentially put all their friends and family on the line and just walk away because of their belief. They'd rather just fake it through the rest of their life, you know?
and hold that thought, because that's going to come back full circle. And because the church right now, I mean, a huge movement, that's part of the movement that the church is doing right now, is keeping especially young, males, engaged. I'll talk about that towards the end of the experience on the movement and some of the changes and recommendations that have come down since within the last 3 to 5 years, with some of the strategies that are there to keep people engaged. But you're
Right.
exactly right. That's part of the process, and that's smart. I mean, in anything that you do, immersion and incorporating anything at a young age. I mean, my daughter and my son are part of a Chinese immersion program at school. I mean, my daughter started the Chinese immersion program in kindergarten. I mean, all of her classes have been in Mandarin Chinese since she
Wow.
started going to school. The only class that she had all the way through elementary and even now in junior high has been English. But outside of that, I mean, she's learned math on the Chinese counting system. I mean, she's had full on classes. I mean, I take her into one of my favorite Chinese restaurants and she has full conversations in Mandarin with the owner. And
Jeez.
the owner then scolded her daughter because her daughter was raised here and she doesn't even speak Mandarin. And she said, "This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about." And so I think immersion into anything, you're exactly right. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you want someone to be strong in anything, you need to start at an early age. You need to know what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Um, and that's how you create strength. That's how you create knowledge. And so again, with the right intent, that's a beautiful thing. It really is. But it can also be very, very harmful. And that's why my youngest daughter, she's not a member of the church.
Yeah.
My entire family's a member of the church, but my youngest daughter has not been baptized in the LDS church. And the reason for that, just real quick, the reason for that is I feel it, like in the LDS church, you're baptized at the age of 8. And the concept behind that is that you're able to know right from wrong at the age of 8.
Mm.
And you start to develop that, right? But that doesn't, important decisions in your life, you're way too young to know whether or not the church is true. You're
Right.
leaning on your family's testimony. You're leaning on mom and dad's testimony. And I didn't want to do that to Romney. I want Romney at the age of 18 to decide for herself if she wants to be LDS, if she wants to be Catholic or the Church of Christ or atheist. It's not for me to enforce that. What my responsibility is as a parent is to guide right from wrong. It's not to it's to instill love, to be a good person and understand what a good person is, right? And not be a destruction to society, and to help them get to a point where they can live on their own when dad's no longer here. That's my job. My job. And watching her journey right now and talking to her about her beliefs is amazing. It's amazing. One day I hope you get the beauty and the experience of the beauty of being able to have those moments with kids one day, that for those that want kids, that they can have those kinds of conversations and not steer them in the direction that you want them to, not the beliefs that you want them to believe, but grow together and talk about those things. And so she was way too young to understand whether the church is true or not. That's why I didn't want to put her through that.
So when you talk about beliefs with her now, how do you kind of approach that? Do you like if something said that you're like, I don't know about that? Do you say, hey, well, let's look at this or let's think of it a different way, or how do you manage that? Because that's obviously not happened with me yet. I have a 7-year old. There's very limited conversations about anything like that. But I've always wondered if that's something that I should do is be like, hey, they believe in this, but there's also all these other things that believe in,
Yeah.
so that was one thing for me growing up is we never had that conversation. It was like, this is what you believe. And then where I live, it's like Church of Christ or Baptist. I mean, we're arguing about whether you play instruments or not. Like
Right.
that's
Right.
really the only, contrast. So
Right.
how do
That
you approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad that you brought it up. It's you want to make it organic, right? And the first time that I had this conversation with my youngest was when because my youngest was attending church still, and not that we made her go. She wanted to go because the young women's program is an incredible program for young women. They teach a lot of great things in it, and they would invite her out to some of the programs that they have in the church on a weekly basis. And she had friends. She had a lot of friends that she still wanted to go to. And the conversation that I had is like, look, I want a baptism on you unless you want to be baptized. If you want to be baptized in the church, fully support it. I won't be able to do it, but your grandpa can do it, or whoever else that you want to do it. And that was kind of how I approached that with all of my kids on our transition out of the churches. It's like, we love you for who you are, right? We're not going to put that pressure on you. There's certain pressure that we will put on you. That's not one of them. And that's something that's part of your journey into adulthood, is figuring out what your purpose is, what you want to do in this life. And so the conversation that I had with Romney was one of love. It was sitting her down, and the first question I asked her is, do you believe in God? And she said, I don't know. And I said, have you prayed about it? And she says, yeah. And I said, how do you feel? And she's like, good, I guess. And I said, that's awesome. So you believe in God right now, at least now. Expand upon that, learn and grow with that. If you feel comfortable and you're happy going to church, then go to church. Okay. And then as you get older and wiser and you get more experienced with things, you'll start to grow, and you'll start to realize what the questions that you're going to have, and you'll study that out, and you'll grow into that. And if it ultimately ends up being, the Mormon church that you want to be a member of, awesome. That's awesome. But the one thing that I want to tell you, Romney, is that we love you no matter what. We love you because you're our daughter, and we love you and want you to be happy. We want you to be successful. And so let's take that journey together. I'm not going to push you in any direction.
Right.
And so if you want to go, you can go. And that's how we approached it. Though the funny thing in my household, and I don't know if my daughter's on this or not. I sent her the link. Her and her boyfriend might be watching, but she could probably attest to this, that like we live a crazy life. And the one thing that my wife and I promised each other is that we weren't going to hold back. There's so many people, not just in the LDS community, but in religion, that are afraid to talk to their children because of certain topics that are taboo: sex, drugs, um, the LGBT, community, hard topics, and nothing's off limits at my table, at the dinner table. And when we've had guests over, or even grandparents or things over, and we open up and we talk about certain things, or who people have been with, or what's anything, it's not off limits. And the reason why we have done that and been open in my household with those types of topics is because why drive your kids away?
Yeah.
They shouldn't be embarrassed for anything, right? They should be able to come to the people that created them and that love them the most and talk about the hardest subjects and not be embarrassed to talk about it. I was. I mean, I was way too afraid to go to my old man and talk about when I lost my virginity or any of the problems that I had, you know? And I wanted to make it clear that like you don't need to go to anybody else. You don't need to go to a pastor and confess intimate details about your life or anything like that with someone who genuinely doesn't know you. They're a stranger to you. They don't know the struggles that you've been through. I'm with you every day. And I want you to know that I'm a parent. I'm not your friend. I'm a parent. I'm a parent that cares about you, your well being, how you grow up, your trials, your tribulations, everything about you. That's my goal in this life is to be a dad. And so hard shit comes up. And when that comes up, we talk freely. We don't hide. We don't run from it, you know, and we hit it head on because that's what beasts and you know, that's what champions do. They face those obstacles together. And I want to be there to help them through any mistakes that they feel that they've made or any struggles that they're going through. I want to be there to help them, guide them through those the way that I would have wanted my old man to be there for me, but was too embarrassed to do it. You know, that's how you love. That's how you raise your children is be open. Nothing is taboo. Everything can be fixed. I just had a conversation with my two boys today. There's two things that you cannot do. You cannot murder and you cannot destroy yourself. Those are two things that you cannot take back. You murder someone, you will go to life or be executed yourself, and I can't do anything there for you on that. You destroy yourself, you destroy your family and everyone that loves you. You don't just kill yourself, you kill everyone around you that loves you. So stay away from those two things. Everything else can be solved. I don't care.
I think that's that's the thing is like more and more people are learning, right? That like, religion sets these guidelines. It's like, hey, you shouldn't do these things because God says you shouldn't do these things, or you should act this way because God says you should act this way. But very rarely do they say, hey, you should be a good person because it's the right thing to do. And these are the things that you shouldn't do because this is what's wrong with those things. And
I would add a third to that. And I would add a third, and this is my moral compass for me, and that is if you're in a relationship, a serious relationship, or you're married, don't commit adultery. Yeah. That's just my personal belief. That's honesty. That's respect to the partner that you've chosen to be with the rest of your life. Or if you believe in eternity, whatever you believe, try to avoid that at all cost. Can that be resolved? Yeah, plenty of people have done it, but don't go down that road and try and head that off up front. I've never had an issue with that in my life, ever. I made that commitment. I love my wife. I love my family. And there's nothing that would take me down that road, because you go down that road, then you destroy your family. Divorces are caused by that. Grief is caused by that. Kids suffer from that. You know, it's a big deal. So that, I would add the third later on in your life when you're of that age to, and I've tried to tell my boys that too, don't play. You might be cool at school to be a player, and you know what, but if you decide to commit to dating someone, be real, and if that's not the one, then cordially part ways and then go do your thing, but that's loyalty.
Do it out of respect for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Just do it for yourself.
Yeah.
For sure.
To sort of get back on track here, let's go back to you were 19 years old. Yep. You were headed on your first mission in Mexico. Leslie had come to you and she had said, listen, I don't want to be the reason that you don't fulfill this commitment. You've come this far. Leslie at that time, Jay's wife, was at that time also very much in the church, raised in the church. So go ahead, Jay, take it from there.
Yeah, so we were really tight. I mean, I had relationships in high school, um, and I had had an intimate couple of intimate relationships with girls that I thought I had loved, and I probably did for that time, you know, as a young man. I'm not. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I've come to grips with that. That's part of you know, the process is going through those feelings and realizing what you love about a person, what you might not like about a person, so that when you commit and you go down the road of marriage or anything like that, you know without a doubt who and what you're looking for in a partner, that's going to go to war in the trenches with you, because that's really what it is, day in and day out, right? And so, crazy experience there. She was my best friend. She was older than me, a little wiser than me. I was working at a car wash at the time. She was a little older than me in college. She was in the rad tech program to be an x-ray tech, and then eventually go on to be a sonographer and ultrasound tech. So she had her stuff together, and hot, absolutely hot, right? Fell head over heels for her.
What more could you
And
ask for?
yeah, I mean, just awesome, funny, um, just genuine. And I just, you know, the first date that I was going to go on with her, she, uh, she was way out of my league, and I was just too afraid. But eventually I got set up. We became very close. And this was about 6 months before I left on the mission. And so, you know, we had, as I was contemplating what I was going to do with my life, I was like, I know one thing for sure. I want to marry this girl. I want to spend the rest of my life with her, you know. And I was young, but I knew what I wanted. I even told her, after I did get roped into that first date where they set me up set me up without me knowing, because they knew I wouldn't reach out to her, that they tricked me into going out on a date, and she was in the car waiting for me, and I just freaked out a little bit. And as we got closer and closer together, um, I just knew I mean, I knew without a doubt I loved her. And you know, having that conversation where I was like, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And she's like, all I know is that I love you too, but with where we're at and with what we believe, the right thing to do is for you to grow up a little bit more. You know, you're 18 years old. You know, how can you know this? We need to get our stuff together, and part of that experience for you that would be good is for you to go on a mission. And I hadn't even really thought about it. It was always in the back of my mind, because that's what my folks wanted to do.
Right.
All I wanted to do was keep playing hockey, trying to make that happen and just be with this girl. And when she said that to me, she's just like, there's no other way, because if you don't, you're going to regret this decision the rest of your life. And I don't want that held over me, because you just wanted to be with me. And so I put my mission, I went to my parents, I went to my bishop, I put my missionary papers in, started going to church every Sunday, trying to, you know, clean up my past transgressions, right? And, you know, trying to live the word, man. And we got, like I said, that was about 6 months. I get my missionary papers. They arrive in the mailbox by the first presidency of the church. The first presidency of the church is, you have the prophet, and then you have his first and second counselor right next to him, right? And then underneath that, you have the 12 apostles. And then underneath that, the organization just goes down. You've got the general authorities, the 70. Um, you know, I won't get into all of the hierarchy, but you receive a letter from the presidency of the church addressed to you. It comes in an envelope in your mailbox. And when you see it, you open up those papers, and it tells you, you know, Jason R. Morrison, you've been called to serve, and then it's blank, 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 and then it explains where you're going to go, where you're going to preach the gospel for at the time. Missions back then were 2 years. I think that's changed in the last little bit, when especially with COVID,
Yeah.
you know. And for the sisters at the time, it was 18 months. It was shorter. And I think now you can serve a mission at 18 now. And I'm going to circle back on your thought that I said for you to pin that we're going to come back to. But I went out for 2 years, and when I got those papers, when I got that envelope in the mail, my heart dropped. Where am I going? And I called up Leslie, and my mom and my dad were waiting, and I jumped in my Bronco 2 at the time. I drove right up the mountainside. We went up on the mountainside. We pulled off. I opened up those papers, and it said, Jason Morrison, you've been called to Hermosillo, Mexico. I'll never forget it. I couldn't even pronounce the name. It's Hermosillo, Mexico, in Sonora, which is the northern desert of Mexico. I like to call it the ass crack or armpit of Mexico. It's right below Arizona. Right below Arizona, you've got Nogales, and that border state there, and then down from there, it went all the way down into like Sinaloa. Big mission. The Sonora Desert's very hot, very large in scope, a lot of pueblitos, like little tiny cities. I mean, I had no idea where I was going. All I knew is I opened up the papers, I looked at my wife, and I said, I'm going to die. I'm going to get shot. And this was, I'm going to be 48 this month. I'm an 18, almost 19-year-old kid going into a foreign land. We didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have technology. I couldn't just look up, Hermosillo, Mexico, and figure out like what I'm getting into. And we just laughed together. I'm like, when I told her, I was like, oh hell, I'm gonna get stabbed down here. She just laughed. She said, you're gonna be fine. I'm gonna write you every day. You're gonna do great. You're gonna do great things down there. And I did awesome things down there, and then leading up to that, you have what's called farewell, where you go to church, you get up at the pulpit, and you address the congregation of your ward. A ward is an area of folks that attend a certain chapel or church in their area. And so several wards make up what's called a stake. And the stake is a number of wards that all reside in a certain stake, and it branches out from there. And so I got up in front of my ward, and we had a large ward, 350 LDS regular members that were there. And I get up there and I give my farewell speech, my testimony. And I had a general authority presiding over that was close to my family. He's a neighbor of mine, Elder Kikuchi. Great man. Great man. Yeah, he was there, and I gave a beautiful little sermon and thanked a few people for getting me to where I needed to be, and then I left. And that was a traumatic experience, leaving the girl that I loved and that I knew I wanted to be with. Everybody goes through that at some point where they have to leave. And I thought, oh man, 2 years away from Leslie, and she's like, I'm going to write you every day. No cell phones back then. No internet. Like I said, I'm receiving stuff by mail. And on an LDS mission back then, you were only allowed to call home twice. You were allowed to call home on Mother's Day, and you were allowed to call home on Christmas. And the different missions that you serve in, the mission president that presides over the elders and sisters that go out on those missions, they might have their customary rules. The customary rule is I get 5 minutes. I get 5 minutes on the phone with my family on those 2 days. That's it.
Question. So is it sort of like a prison system though, where like would you go and sneak a phone call? Like would you go and be like, down the streets there's a payphone?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah,
okay.
We'll get to that. That's part of my experience too. Well, so I'll never forget when you go out to a foreign country. At the time, the policy and procedure was you go down to a missionary training center, which is basically on the Brigham Young campus down in Provo, Utah. And the purpose of that missionary training center is to train you and prepare you for how to proselyte and preach, and And then on top of it, so everybody goes through that, but if you're going to a foreign country, that time there in the missionary training center, they call it the MTC, it's extended to 2 months. So I was there for 2 months and expected to learn Spanish in 2 months. And the way that they do that is through immersion. I mean, every day, more than 8 hours a day, you're sitting with a guy or a brother or a sister who's served a mission or a native from that particular country that is talking to you all day long in Spanish. And the funny backstory to that is I had taken Spanish 1 and 2 from Senora Caremas at Highland High, and I had a D minus in Spanish 1 and I had a D minus in Spanish 2. And the only reason why I had a D minus and not an F is because she loved me for who I was.
Right? I had a few teachers like that.
I was a good dude, and she wanted to see me graduate. And the funny thing is that like I slept all through those classes. Like I said, I only cared about art and hockey and writing. I used to write a lot. And she came to me right before my graduation day, and she looked me straight in the eye and she said, "I do not know why I'm not failing you. You should not be graduating. You should not be graduating." But she gave me a hug, which is probably not even allowed nowadays. She put her arm around me, gave me a hug, and she whispered to me, she said, "This is going to come back on you. Me passing you, I want you to remember this day that like I passed you, you're graduating because of me." So here I am several months later getting called to Mexico. And I'm thinking, oh, Mrs. Karamas, why did you do this to me? You put a curse on me. And she didn't know. She didn't know. And so I go out to Mexico. I do the 2 months. I was called to a district leader, which is a leader over the sisters and elders within my district, which was, 7 or 8 people. So I felt all cool that I had a leadership calling in the training center. And Leslie wrote me every day, every day. And I had the opportunity to look forward back then before all this COVID crap. Back then, traditionally, when you go to the airport to fly out to where your destination is, you'd have all of your family and friends there holding up signs and watching you get on the plane because that was their last glimpse of you. Right. And they hadn't seen you for 2 months. And you're hugging them, and of course they don't want you to be hugging the opposite sex or anything like that. And so I had to shake Leslie's hand and give her the wink and everything, and I just wanted to grab a hold of her and give her a kiss and tell her that I'm going to miss her so much. But we had an amazing time in the airport terminal. I get on that plane, and the unique thing about that experience was you're supposed to always travel in pairs of 2. And the reason why the elders and the sisters, that's what they call them, the reason why they pair in 2s is for protection, temptation, right. Just good protocol to be with somebody else. Well, I had some visa problems. Getting into Mexico, and I did not have a companion that was going to the same place that I was. So I had to travel at 19 into a foreign land by myself, knowing I had visa issues, didn't know what to expect, never been there, didn't have any real knowledge of where I was going, heard things from certain people. I hop off this. By the way, I get on this plane. I had a connection to get into Hermosillo. I get there and I'm walking. It was a small plane. I'm walking down off the plane from a ladder, and it is hot. I mean, super hot. And what I didn't realize is that the engines weren't on. The plane was not running. I thought it was the jet engines of the plane or something. And the further I started walking away from the plane, the more I realized, holy shit, Like it, and that day it was 100, I think 17 degrees that
Fuck
day
that.
Yeah, you're
in
just
the Sonoran Desert. I'm in a suit. I'm in a suit and a tie. I get into the airport. Wow, you think you know Spanish? I thought I knew Spanish. I could bear my testimony, I could bear my convictions, I could bear my beliefs in Spanish. And I get in there and like I'm sure there was gringos in there, but I didn't remember seeing any gringos in there. And there's no one there to pick me up. There's
Oh,
no one there to pick me up. So
oh,
I'm standing in where my luggage should be coming out for almost 2 hours, almost longer than 2 hours, closer to 3 hours, and no one's there. I can't understand anybody. I tried to communicate. I didn't have a phone number. And the reason why I didn't have a phone number or any information is I had packed all of that in my luggage and my luggage was lost.
oh no. Oh my God.
Okay,
Well,
so my luggage and even I had so much anxiety that I had a like a little handbag that my mom had given me at the airport with like fresh cookies,
right.
some contact info. Like I said, we didn't have cell phones back then. So all of my contact information to get a hold of certain people, these fresh cookies and some cards and some money that was slipped into this little handbag. I left it on the plane.
Of nothing.
I had nothing. And so I'm sitting there and it's like I'm down at the terminal. And then all of a sudden, at almost the 3 hour mark, I had what's called the assistant the assistants, the office assistants. There was three guys. They were the two office assistants and a secretary, all young dudes. Um, Two of them were Mexican, natives of their country. The other one was a gringo. And they show up and they're like, Elder Morrison, and they're like, Elder Morrison. And I'm like, okay, relief, right? Like I've got someone. They're trying to communicate to me. And at the time, they weren't speaking English either. The one guy there wasn't speaking English because he was fairly new. He was in the offices because he had just arrived. And his name, he was waiting to get transferred into his first area. And he's from Bountiful, Utah. He's from Bountiful, Utah. His name is, I believe his name was Elder Freeman. And anyway, I get to the mission offices without any luggage, trying to communicate like I lost my luggage and everything. And they're having a full on conversation in the offices. I look down on the floor. It's like dirt, super dirty. I've seen a few cockroaches already at this point. I've never seen one in my life. Probably not a big deal for people in Florida and stuff, but I'm a young dude, I got some culture shock going on. Everyone's speaking stuff that I can't understand. And they all are laughing. They're laughing hysterically, you know.
You're
Or
freaking
no,
out.
no, no. Sorry. They're not laughing. They were laughing going into there, but they're talking. And because they had been laughing leading up into going to these offices, they're trying to talk to me and I'm just laughing, just rolling with it. And they're trying to communicate some information to me. And so I'm laughing along like, no comprende,
Right.
no hablo español. I'm like just a big gringo, tall, skinny gringo, dude. And then the another American that had some time, about a year in there, leans over to me and says, "We're talking about the prophet. The prophet just passed away today."
Oof.
And it was
What
President
a turn
Hunter.
of events.
It was President Hunter, I think, at the time, and he had passed. On my flight, while I was on my flight on that day, commuting over, the leader of my church passed. And I'm just like, can my day get any worse? Like I've been traveling alone. I've been fear. I'm in fear. It was like I'm going to be in this Sonora desert heat.
For 2
for
years.
2 years. I lost my luggage. I miss my family already. I'm seeing stuff as I'm traveling through to the mission offices that I've never seen in my life before.
I bet.
And they then take me out for my first dinner, and I'm really worried about the food because I was a picky eater when I was a kid. And we get to no shit, we get to the first house, my first meal, it's fish head soup that day.
Oh, hell no.
Hated fish. Hated fish. And it was the two Mexicans that went. I had nobody that spoke English. And so the thing that they had taught me in the missionary training center is that you do not deny the food, or it's a slap in the face to them and their culture. Like, they're so poor that anything that they give up, you better show respect, because like, these guys do not have, I mean, when I say they do not have anything, they've got a carton for a house, 10, if best, in the area that we were in. Very poor. When I asked to go use the restroom, it's a hole in the ground with a pipe sticking out of it, with a little, round hole that you can barely fit your ass on top of.
Jay, really quick, we have a lot of new folks in the chat. We want to thank the Blackjack Army and for joining in. We thank you guys. They're asking what part of Mexico you were in. They weren't in here for that.
State of Sonora, Hermosillo, Mexico. That was not my. That's the mission I was called to. The area that I got assigned to, that I'm leading into, is Obregon, and it's about halfway down. You've got the, what is that? I've already forgotten. You've got the Gulf there, because you got Tijuana on the one side, and then you got on the other side of the Gulf there, you've got Sonora, which is right below Arizona. So from Nogales all the way down to, not quite like Mazatlan, it's more like Sinaloa area down there.
Yeah, Mike, the captain of Blackjack Army, spent a lot of time in Mexico.
Oh, he knows.
Yeah.
He knows. He'll vouch. He can vouch. I don't even know him. He can already tell me, like, I'm legit. This is 20. By the way, I'm 48. I was, like I said, 19 at the time.
Yeah.
Right. So this is 28 years ago.
Right.
So some of that city wasn't even paved at the time. Some of that, a lot of the roads through that system, they had one main highway that went all the way through, but a lot of those roads weren't even developed at that time. They were just in the process of developing some of those cities.
I also have to point out, sorry, Jay, to those of you wondering if Jay is a criminal, no, Jay is a former member. Jay is a former member of the Mormon Church, and what they said, Landon, is they said, if you guys want a criminal, we know a couple. We'll send him on to the show. So I said we'll stay in touch, but no,
I've seen
Jay is
craziness down there. We
didn't think this through, Dillan. We didn't think this through.
No, Veracruz is down at the very end of Mexico. I'm looking at what Blackjack Army is saying. State of Veracruz, no. Veracruz is farther down south. One of my second companion was from Veracruz, and they have an awesome way of speaking down there. Everything's like bomba, and they have like just like we have our dialects. I'm sure people are like, oh, this dude's this dude's from Utah. He's a hick or something, redneck or something, with the way that I'm talking. Because like when I hear my family from Long Island, New York, or Jersey, it's hilarious, and they think it's so cool when they hear me. But and the same thing with different states and Mexico. So, but yeah,
I get made fun of all the time, so I feel
the problem with being up in the state of Sonora is that the Mexico Spanish is horrible. It's from the gutter to begin with.
Right.
Compared to places like, Spain and Argentina, Chile, some of these areas that might be more well off. I think the Spanish in Mexico is really just gutter. And I'm sure the UK feels the same way about our English, kind of, you know what I'm saying? It's not as formal. And the further you go up north, the more Spanglish you get, because of the culture that's coming down from the states up north, from the border. I'm talking about the United States, that culture and everybody wanting to get in, that leads down into a mixed language from the gutter. which isn't bad. It's just it is what it is. So, por favor, yeah, he's saying please for everything, ask for anything, much more polite culture, right?
These guys are great. They're friends of the show. Also, Jay, we've interviewed.
And just to clarify, it's northern Mexico, so right below Arizona. And it would be considered west of Juarez. You guys all probably heard Juarez. You want to talk about most dangerous place in the world beside Chiapas,
that's where Jerry lived, Dillan.
Yeah, fuck that. Jerry goes, oh, you guys should come to Mexico. Fuck that. You think my big ass
tried to drag me there for 2 years, man.
Spider's the size of my goddamn ass? Fuck that.
Jalisco. Yeah, I've rolled through Jalisco. Yeah, I'm just reading some of the comments here.
Mm-hmm. To get back on track, JK, you were in Mexico.
So in Mexico, I had this crazy dinner experience, and I choked down what I could, and some of the warnings at this time too is that like the cardinal rule, like the thing that you obey going down there, is you do not drink the public water system down there, and you do not eat anything green, any vegetable that's green down there, you stay away from it, because they don't have the culinary systems or even the water that farmers use here in the States. Like their water is all like landfill water, polluted. Like it's basically sewer. It's sewage basically, and that's what's coming out of the tap. There's been several times too when I showed up in Obregon, I got asked to go to Obregon. We get in there, I turned the tap water on. It was running brown. It was running brown at the time, and it would only happen certain times of the day. Like it would go brown for a couple hours, then it would go white, and it'd go brown. You'd be showering and you'd have brown water coming out and everything. I get to this house. It was an okay house. It had tile, like a cement floor. It was 2 stories to house 4 missionaries. So we had 2 missionaries upstairs in a bedroom and 2 downstairs. And when I got there, everyone was Mexican except for one guy, Elder Taylor, out of Arizona, and he had about 6 months left before he was done with his mission. I show up at the house and he's not talking in English at all. My first companion was a dude that was named Elder Pena, and he was from Oaxaca, Mexico, bottom part of Mexico, and he was a senior missionary that had 6 months left as well. So I was going to be his last missionary companion that he would have before he would go home. I get there, no one's talking to me in English. There's only one person that could, and that's part of that immersion process that I'm talking about, so that you can, for protection, and so that you can learn the language very, very quickly. When no one's talking to you in English and you're forced to learn,
you got to figure it out.
And so I would carry a little notebook around, and any word that I didn't, and I was never a good student. Here I was, this lazy hockey player, and worried about which parties I was going to go to on the weekend, all through high school and whatnot. And here I am with a notebook that I kept in my front pocket. And every word I did not know, I would write it in my notebook. And at night, I would spend 2 or 3 hours every night. Boom, boom. I cannot tell you how brutal that is. And they would laugh at me. My elders would laugh at me. They'd poke fun of me, like, and I'd be like, bitch, you don't even know what it would be like for you coming up to my country. You wouldn't even know. And here I am in a foreign land down here trying to help your people out, and you're laughing at me. And it pissed me off. And I was, the first month of my mission, I witnessed a murder on the streets. and I was grabbed when I was going to handle it. I watched a drunk man on a bike get beat down, and after this guy was stabbed on the ground, I was going to go and see if this guy was alive and help him out, and two people grabbed me and said, "What are you doing? Do you want to die too?" You know, like this was shock. And then I watched people on the street walk up to him like they were going to help him, and then ransack his pockets for anything that he might have had on him, and then just bounce, just laying there, bled out, right? Like those are things that I saw the first month in
Can
my
I really
new
quick make a point?
mission.
I really quick just want to make the point that this was a church mission. The church knew what kind of shit that you guys were going to see there, and they were sending mass amounts of people in the hopes that you would convert these new members, right? Like that to me is the craziest thing, is that like they knew what you guys were going to see. They knew that you, Jay, at 19 years old, were going to see guys getting killed, women being assaulted. They knew that, and yet they still thought, this is God's will, we're going to send you.
We'll talk about the cartel here in a minute, because I see the comments coming up, because I've had run-ins with the cartel down there too. Good and bad.
Mike mentions here it was probably a punishment. Do you think, thinking back on it, do you think that you were purposely put in that area?
No.
I've always wondered that. Do they put people in certain areas saying, this guy might be a hard one to crack?
No, but what they do, they say that the brethren pray over it for each calling. And when you fill out your application to go, they ask you if you ever took a language class in high school. And knowing my dumb ass at the time, I probably put Spanish down, and they saw a tall white gringo that looked like a beast.
Right.
Because he sent in the photo of yourself and everything, and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna send this dude down to Hermosillo, man. This is where he's supposed to go."
Yeah.
Did you have any friends that were like I'm going to Florida? Where are you going,
Oh,
Jay?
yeah.
Like,
I had dudes. So what's crazy is my best friend at the time, he was dating Leslie's best friend, and he got called in, and she did the similar thing. He was head over heels for her, and I'm still friends with her. She's on my Facebook page. She lives not too far from me. I'm not going to call her out because I don't want you going and looking her up. Great person. But she was dating my best friend at the time, and my best friend was a screw up just like me, and when he opened up his missionary papers, he got called to Mexico as well, but a different state. And so here we are, 6 months leading up to our mission, palling around going, "Yeah, we're going to Mexico. We're going to Mexico together." Well, in the MTC, the sad story with him is Elder Kikuchi, the guy that I told you that I know really well, that presided over my meeting and who's a neighbor of mine. He has a love for the missionary program, and he has some tactics to weed out the people that are not ready to go. And one of those tactics is that he comes down to the missionary training center to give like a devotional, a sermon to all the missionaries, and he rips into you. He rips right into your heart, and he makes you feel guilty, even to the most innocent, worthy people. Like if you tipped a garbage can over or did anything silly with your car or anything, like you weren't, like, he made you feel so low that like you were running to your branch bishop, your branch president, in the mission training center to confess all of your sins again, because you were just like the most rotten person, because he wanted to make sure that you were committed to living the guidelines, the standards of the church. And so he comes into BYU where we were at for this devotional, and he ripped into my heart, man. He ripped into Matt's heart. And I remember Matt looking over at me, and I just gave him the eye like, "Dude, we should not be here. We should not be here." Right.
Yeah.
And so we had this conversation, and I'm like, "What are you going to do?" He's like, "Dude, I'm going to go to the bishop." And he's like, "What are you going to do?" I'm like, "Same thing, man. Like, I can't live 2 years like feeling like I shouldn't be here, that I'm not worthy to be here." and they put this high standard on you to be worthy going out to do this 2-year mission at the time. And so I go to my branch bishop, my branch president in my little district, and I was a district leader at the time, and I had confessed my sins to him. Like, yeah, I screwed up with, my girlfriend here. I did this, I did that. When I was a sophomore in high school, I threw a rock through this dude's window. I'm confessing all kinds of stupid crap, right? And he just looks at me, and I had done some things, with my girl at the time, but nothing that isn't, since my daughter's probably on this call, Ray, we did not have premarital sex. I'm just going to leave it right there. Okay. We had fooled around and stuff, and I was
fucking Bill Clinton over here.
Yeah. I was doing, we were messing around, and it wasn't even about necessarily her. It was just all the stuff that I had done, partying. I partied all the way up to my mission. Yeah. They threw a keg when I left. Let's put it that way. Okay. I was not probably worthy to go there, but I was honest, and I confessed to my bishop. And you know what? I love that man. I can't remember his exact name, but he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "Are you changed?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm committed." And he goes, "Good. Forgotten. You're done. Like, you're a good guy. Forget it. The Lord loves you for who you are. Forget it." And that was a thing that I loved about him, is that he was like, "Listen, you're at a certain place in your life, you're committed, forget." And looking back on that, anyone that believes in Christianity, that's what the Savior would do. You could go into all the parables that, even with the girl at the young adulteress at the well, and he was just like, he taught her, he loved her. He didn't say it was okay, but he gave her the pass, right? And that's what a Lord would do. A true Savior, at least my Savior, would do that. So anyway, so he ended up confessing. Matt got kicked home. Wow. He was in for 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, and he got sent back home. Of course, his girlfriend broke up with him.
Is it because of something he confessed to?
Yeah, he confessed to messing around, and he got sent home. And that weighed on me heavily. Like, we had done similar things. I said, "What did you confess to?" And he told me everything. And I said, "Dude, mine's way worse than that. And I'm here. Yeah, I'm here." And he's going home. And he had to face the embarrassment of just standing up at his farewell with everybody. And he had to come home, and everyone turned the cheek to him. Everyone in his ward, like his church, everyone turned their backs to him. He was an outcast. It was an embarrassment to his family. I mean, it was brutal. He was writing me while I was on my mission. I was like, "Dude, you're blessed to be home. You don't even want to know what I'm going through."
Would he end up staying with the church, Jay?
Yeah. So ironically, he came home. His girl left him. He ended up getting into a relationship with a girl, ended up getting her pregnant really early. She bounced on him with his kid, moved to a different state. He's tried to stay in contact with her. She wanted nothing to do with him. She didn't want him to have anything to do with the daughter. He's written her birthday letters and emails and years and years and years, and no response, and would get a response or would send her money, was trying to do the right thing. And he was very pissed off. And ironically, he's the one that's tried to save me to come back to the church. He's loyal to the T. He's loyal to the T. I went on a camping trip with him 5 years ago, and he was just like, "Man, you're going off the deep end, Jay."
Do you think that him being kicked back home kept you more determined to stay there and finish it out? Like, you really didn't want to fuck up, seeing that your friend got back and was sent back to shit.
That comes into the next part of the story, and I could go on for days, Dylan, but to answer your question on that, yeah, and I'm a talker, even more so than Dylan.
I'm good at ringing it in, though. All I have to do is talk over you, and you're pretty good. You're pretty good at reeling it in.
Tell me to shut up, but To answer your question, yeah, I felt that pressure because I wanted to go home. My best one of the bishops that let me go out and that gave me the pass to go out, he ended up dying in a boating accident at Yuba Lake here in Utah. He fell off cleaning his boat, and it was a very tragic all of a sudden accident where he drowned.
Jesus.
And my parents wrote me and let me know that he had passed and sent me his funeral uh you know pamphlet and everything, and it screwed me up because this guy was a really good guy, and because I was struggling with the Spanish and everything, I wanted to go home. That set me over the edge. I was like ready to go home.
Oh yeah.
Now, how far into your trip had this been? Were you like at least a month in?
I was probably about 3.5, 4 months in. I made it to
Okay.
about the 4 month mark, and then I had a mental breakdown because we would go to knock on these doors, and these people would be like, "What the hell are you saying? I can't even understand what you're asking. I can't even understand you. What's this crazy dude asking me?" It'd be like someone from Russia coming over here learning English in 3 weeks and trying to communicate to you, and you'd be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Like slam the door on it on that they were
Yeah.
slamming the door on my face.
And so you felt like you were failing
Yeah,
the church. You felt like you were failing
yeah.
your purpose.
And my companions weren't being ultra patient. They weren't being patient with me, you know. Um, anyway, I'll unbutton this for you, Gabe. That's the cholo in me, homie.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
All right. Okay, I'm just keeping it real, Blackjack and Gabe. That's what I'm known for. So, but yeah, I wanted to come home. I was pussing out, and that's when Elder Taylor came in. He was that gringo, the American down there. I had never heard him say one word of English to me while I was in that house, all the way up until about 4 months, and then I was just kind of sobbing, feeling pity for myself. And he walked in there and he started yelling at the top of his lungs. And he's like, "Listen here, you motherfucker, you piece of shit." He was swearing at the top of his lungs, every 4-letter word. And I was just shocked. I was just like, "What?" He's like, "Man the fuck up and do not make us look bad." He's like, "You are a puss. Stop pussing out and man up, you bitch." He's like, You've only been out here 4 months. I got 6 months left. You quit being a pussy and man up. You're
How
a bitch."
old was he? Was he also around the 19, 20?
Yeah. He would been close to 21 at the time because he left at 19 too.
And so he had already been sort of broken in. I
he'd
know
been
I'm
out there
jumping in a
18
lot.
months. He'd been
I
out
know
there 18 months.
I'm jumping in a lot, but for time, I sort of got to try to speed us up a little bit. So he was almost out at this point, and he comes to you and he's screaming at you basically as the guy who he's leaving behind, and he's saying, "Hey, like you're the fucking last hope,
He said
motherfucker,
that. He
because
said,
I'm
"Man,"
leaving."
that's an exact quote. He said, "Man the fuck up, bitch. Stop being a pussy."
Damn.
Man, these
And
Mormons.
right then, boom, it clicked. It just snapped, clear as day. I was like, he's right. Like that dog in me came out, like I was a hockey player, I'm tough. I'm mentally tough, I've gone through hard shit, in my life, or at least I thought, and I'm like, I can do this. And so that's when everything changed for me. Instead of, they would laugh at me and make fun of me, but how I learned my Spanish is I ditched the notebook. And every morning in my area, because it was so poor, there was a gang of cholos that would hang out on the corner by the hot dog vendor on the corner of my street, right in front of my house. And these dudes were hood. I mean, you want to talk about like some vatos, man. These guys get down, they get dirty, they put in work, I mean, they were scary to all of the elders. And here I am. I'd walk out every morning before we're supposed to go, because you're supposed to leave and proselyte by like 9 a.m. or something. You wake up, you do your scripture study and all of that. I would go out in the mornings, and instead of doing my scripture study, I would go out and I'd hang out with the cholos. And the first time I did it, they were looking at me like this gringo, what's this gringo want? Like I'm fresh meat for these guys. Like they could rob me, stab me, kill me, whatever. And I went out there and I just started trying to talk to them, and they were not laughing at me. There's a difference at laughing at someone and then laughing with them.
Yeah.
And it snapped to them that like, hey, this dude is trying to be a homie. Like he's trying to help. Like he cares. He cares. Right. Like I showed them that I loved them just the way that I loved everybody else down there. And like, you know, yeah, sure, I'd hook them up with some pesos every once in a while when I got extra money from my parents to buy them some hot dogs and hang out and chill. And we made a deal. I said, listen, I will teach you all of the cuss words in English if you teach me Spanish and how to hold it down here in Sonora. And they were like, it's on, man. And so every day, and this was like I said, 4 months in, I was in that area for almost 8 months. And so for the next several months, these dudes, I would come out every morning and they'd be waiting for me, and we would just chop it up. And they would say, no, essay. Like, it wasn't like that, but I'm just trying to portray, like they'd say, like, you don't say it this way, you say it this way, you know. And they would teach me the slang and the dialect of Sonora, you know. And they'd be like, say it again, say it like this. And by a year in, my one of the companions that I had got transferred to another area, and I met up at a zone conference, or a devotional, and I hadn't seen him for like 4 or 5 months. And when he saw me, I walked right up to him and I was like, "Órale pues, ¿cómo has estado, eh? Vámonos, like let's go get, like, vamos a comer, like let's go down here and let's go get some pizza, man." You know, and I had the slang, I had the dialect. He just started crying. He's like, "Dude, you have the gift of tongues, man."
Yeah.
He got emotional. He's like, "I can't even believe you're talking like this. Like, I can't even tell the difference between your accent and someone that's lived here their entire life. How did you learn so fast?" And I was like, "The cholos, man. Like the dudes on the corner that everybody's afraid of." And like I spoke it perfectly. That was, again, 28 years ago, but I spoke it beautifully from the gutter. And they would like, "¿Cómo has estado, eh? Un tiro?" They would teach me all these slang words, like, "You want to fight," you know, and all this stuff. Like, no, they'd be like, "You don't say it pendejo. You say it like, pinche puto pendejo, chinga tu chinguitísima madre, eh?" They would be teaching me shit like that, you know? And I would go out there and roll with these dudes, and all the missionaries were absolutely jealous, especially the gringos, because I spoke from the gutter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was using the slang, and when I'd go on proselyte, I could vibe and relate with the people there because I truly loved them for who they were. I didn't care if they were cholo, if they were, you know, vagabonds or, you know, homeless. I didn't care. Everyone was a potential person that needed to hear the word of God at the time, right?
Yeah.
So everyone was jealous of that.
And so everybody was a mark, and that was what your whole reason was. You know, you were there to try to convert as many people as possible. Let's sort of wind down your time on the mission, though, just for the sake of time. I mean, I don't want us to be here too long.
Yeah. So I get out there. You want me to just? I'll sum it up really quick. I get out there. I start. You know, I learn the language. I get sick about. I'm like 13 months in. I get parasites. I lose 45, 50 pounds. I'm already thin. With all the walking, we didn't have cars, we didn't have bikes. We walked the Sonoran Desert every day. I put miles in, man. I wish I had a Fitbit or something to see how many miles I walked. I had Doc Martens, and I wore the soles off those I kept them. I threw them out when I moved up here. So anyway, I got really sick. They almost sent me home. They asked me where I wanted to serve the last year of my mission. I told them, if you send me to the States, I'm done. I'm going to stay here. We dealt with it there. And I never really got better. And there's crazy stories about that, but I just went on. And then as I had downtime with the amoebas and everything that I had, the parasites that I had a lot of downtime. And so I was studying scripture heavily, heavily. I was reading the Bible. I was reading the Book of Mormon. I was cross-referencing every passage that I could get my hands on. I wanted to know everything. And I started just really having doubts. And as soon as my shelf cracked, I immediately started going to the leaders in my mission, and they couldn't answer any of the questions. They couldn't answer any of them. So that's where my doubts started.
Yeah.
And then when I left the mission, they were thankful, because they said, the one thing I'll share there is that they said that he got up in my last meeting in front of all the mission and said, Elder Morrison, we're so grateful that you're able to go back to your family. You speak from the gutter. In 2 years here, you speak like, they basically, the way it translated is you're trash. You speak like trash.
Yeah.
And I just got up right after that statement and I just said, you paid me the biggest compliment in my life, because this place is trash and the people are poor. And what you just confirmed is that
You did your job.
I did my job. I loved the people that needed the gospel the most.
Yeah. So, really quick, Blackjack, of course, asking how we all met. Myself and Jay met through gaming. Jay's a big gamer on the Destiny 2, and myself and Landon met each other after Landon did some show stuff with my old podcast partners. So, I had introduced these guys, and we had done a show up 2 years ago where we had talked about a lot of the same things. And I'm sure Landon, if you stay in touch, he can link that to you guys in your Discord over there. So, of course, Jay, you finally felt like, you know what, I did what I was supposed to do, but your shelf had started to break, and you had returned home to Leslie. And this is where the story takes sort of an emotional toll. Where I know we're all going to get teary eyed because we did the last time. So go ahead, Jay.
Well, yeah. So the shelf was broken. I get home. There's a lot of stories that we shared in the first show. If you want to go back and talk about it, like, I was I didn't know at the time, when you live a life like that, where you're in the gutter, you forget your old language. You forget where you came from a lot. Like, you forget how good you had it. You're very humble. You become very like broken. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I get home and like I was pretty messed up psychologically, just because like I walked into my parents' house and I ran my feet across their carpet and I just broke out in tears.
It was a shell shock to be
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, running tap water, I broke down being able to stick my face underneath tap water and just drink regular tap water. I'd never done that.
Yeah.
Never done that in that time. Lived it truly. So I get home and my like, things are going okay. I'm like, you know what? I'd go to these leaders. They'd say, get over it. You don't need to worry about this. You're fixated on stuff that doesn't matter, that will be revealed in proper time. Like, and there's a lot of inconsistencies there. I won't get into that. But I finally got to the point where I had kids. By the way, I came home from Mexico. Leslie did write me every day. I did have phone calls with her because I was begging on the streets for food. I got to that point where we were living on $1 a day. So I was living on $30 a month. I lost a lot of weight, had parasites. I was cut off from my family. I had no money. I finally called my dad and he tried to send me money. They got money down to me in a Pringles can. I got robbed the very next day. And anyway, there's all these things where, like, when I got back, I had that bottled up and I'm with my wife and we have these kids and I'm just like, oh, I guess that's part of the journey, right? That's part of the process and having faith. And then part of being a member of the church is you have to pay it. Like, one of the commandments is you have to be a full tithe payer, right? You have to give 10% of your income to the church to be in the temple. And backing up to that, to get married to Leslie in the temple, to have a temple wedding, I I had to be a full tithe payer. So I was paying my tithing back then. I didn't have kids, obviously, yet, and I could afford to do that and everything. Well, now later on, we're married, we have kids, and we're struggling financially, just like everybody else coming up and trying to make it. And my wife and I were going in for an interview to get our temple recommends to go into the temple to watch my wife's little sister get married. And so we go in for our temple recommend interviews by the bishop, and I have mine first. And he asks me a list of questions that you have to go through to enter into the temple. And he gets to the tithing part, and I tell him I'm a full tithe payer. And I was at that time, I wasn't leading up to that for a couple of years because it was the difference of feeding my kids, right? Like I was struggling financially, and it was like, do I provide to my kids and give them the things that they need and do the things that we need to do as a family to continue to live where we're living? And Leslie and I were feeling guilty about that, and we committed to be like, we're going to make this happen. And so we did. Like,
can I ask a question?
We did that.
So in the Mormon church, you paying in that 10%, is it like in other religions where they talk about planting a seed? Like the seed is the amount of money that you donate to the church? Landon, you look confused. Have you never heard of this?
No, not
So
really.
you can donate. You don't have to pay these funds in money. You can donate stock. There's farmers that have donated part of their land or their crops or given it to the church to pay their tithe. But you're required as a commandment to be a full tithe payer, and that's 10%. And if you get into the history and the scripture in that, the 10% has evolved. It wasn't actually 10% back in the day. It's evolved into what it is now. And anyway, we committed to paying our tithing, right? And we had consistently done that for almost 6 months because we knew Leslie's sister's temple wedding was coming up and we wanted to be there for it. So I go in, I tell him that I'm a full tithe payer because at the time I was. He didn't ask me if it was 6 months, a month, or a year. They're not even allowed to ask that. Are you committed to paying your tithing? Are you a full tithe payer? And at that point, I was a full tithe payer. So I walk out of that interview, and by the way, dude's was a neighbor of mine, a real asshole. You know, I mean, from the moment we moved in there. And my wife goes in for her interview. Mind you, she's going into an office in the building, in the church, behind closed door with a grown ass man, an adult. Like, that's just uncomfortable to begin with. To have him ask her very personal questions. And this guy's a stranger to us. You know, they have a set of like 10, 12 questions about infidelity, about morality, about whether you believe the prophet is true at the time, tithing, all you live the word of wisdom, which is you're not allowed to smoke, drink, tobacco, tea, coffee, alcohol, no consumption of that. And yeah, all of those dudes drink Coke and everything, but that's fine. That's caffeines and soda, but that's fine. But coffee's off limits and stuff. So anyway, she gets in there. They ask her the tithing, and she says she's a full tithe payer. And so he goes, hang on one second. He walks right next door to the clerk's office, pulls out a printout on their printer showing the tithing that we have paid up for every month. And he's like, doesn't show that you've consistently, it shows that you guys started making a choice to start paying, but you haven't been consistent. And that's not part of the church standard. Is you ask the question, they give you an honest answer, and you give them the pass on that. So he hands her the printout and says, hey, you know, continue doing it and we'll reevaluate this in 6 months and see if we can get you in there. So she leaves the church and she's walking up to my house. You know, we're just a couple of blocks, and she calls me. She calls me on her phone and she's like bawling. And I said, what's wrong, baby? You know, like, what's going on? And she's like, just come and pick me up. I pick her up. We go up the hill. She tells me what happened behind that closed door with that bishop and what was said, and realizing that we weren't going to be able to attend her sister's wedding.
Was this Leslie's first real shelf-breaking moment?
She's always had certain things, but we were never really, like, talking about that. She was
Mhm,
never really coming to me. She struggled going just with the amount of pressure that they
mhm,
would put on her with certain callings that they gave her. They would call her to be like a Sunday school teacher or something to keep her active in the church, and it takes a lot of work to do some of these callings outside of your normal job, and she's a professional, man. She's a
yeah.
stenographer. So yeah, I mean, I know that she's had doubts and struggles just like I had, but she was trying to make an effort because that's what you're supposed to do. You know,
Yeah,
that's what we believe.
and especially at this point, because her sister was a part of the church and getting married, she wanted to make sure she was there to support her sister.
Yeah, and they basically didn't allow us to go and see her sister get married in the temple. I
Oh,
wasn't
so
there.
you weren't able to go after
Well,
the
if my wife wasn't
reevaluation.
gonna be able to go in, I'm
Mhm,
not, I'm not gonna go in alone with and
mhm,
you know what I mean? Like, and that and the other part of that is when we got married. When we got married, I got
mhm,
married 3 months after I came home from the mission, really
mhm.
quick. So I got married at 21, right? And or 2022, the way that the year changed. Yeah. So we got married really, really quick. And my parents or my grandparents, all my family from Long Island, New York, they weren't allowed into the wedding ceremony. We had to have like what's called a ring exchange for anyone that was not LDS to be able to see us get married. That's the greatest day of my life.
Mhm.
It was the greatest day of my life. And it could have been better had I know what I know now and what I believe in and now, but like a lot of
Have
my family couldn't even be there to see me get married.
Can I ask that have you thought about, like, renewing your vows in a
Yeah.
modern
Oh
time?
yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Because I feel like that might give you a little bit of closure, and now, the majority of your children are grown, like, they can be a part of that, like, I think
Yeah,
that might be
the the
something.
the thinking on that is I can be a part of theirs.
Of course, of course.
And we can kind of uh do that vow again
Mhm,
internally with each other, celebrating
mhm,
the victories of my kids, and that's all I care about. We know where we're at.
mhm,
I don't need that to go back and do that. I'll just
mhm,
have a great time at my son's wedding and
mhm.
all of my kids' weddings
Yeah.
one day.
So, let's
So
get more.
that's the real hard crack for her.
Mhm,
And then do you want me to come down to where, like, so we had a bunch of crazy experiences like that. The follow up to that you really hated, Dylan, was
mhm,
when, like, after that went down, within 6 weeks, we were at church and the bishop comes walking out of the sermon, opens up the door to, a congregation of 350 people or more. And I'm standing out in the foyer and there's all these people that were talking with me and surrounding me. And he opens up the doors and he comes right up to me, grabs me by the hand, and he goes, "Brother Morrison, how's that tithing coming along?" In front of all these dudes. He wanted to call his shot. He wanted it. And I laid into him. I
yeah,
laid into him right there, like pretty much almost beat his ass right there
yeah,
in the chap right near the chapel. He's an older guy. That's the only thing that held me back from doing it
yeah,
is he was an older guy.
yeah.
I would have beat his ass.
Yeah, it seemed like, from the stories that there was a period of time where the church was really riding y'all in y'all's dick, and there was a period of time, and I don't know how far I'm skipping for, but there was a period of time that really broke the camel's back for everybody when they decided to interview your children.
Yeah, so we had that. We struggle through just like all kinds of challenges, and then finally my son is turning to be it was either when he was a deacon or a teacher. So when you get the priesthood in the Mormon church, you get the Aaronic priesthood at the age of 12. So I cannot remember if it was at the age of 12 or if it was at the age of 14 when he became a teacher. But when you go in to get those different levels of priesthood, you have to go into this bishop, have an interview with them again, and they have to ask you all these questions about your worthiness to get the priesthood. And they go in and they start talking to him. And apparently my son comes home and he walks up to me and I said, "Hey, how did your interview go?" And he's just like, "Hey, Dad, what is bestiality?"
Yeah.
Jesus.
And
Yeah.
like, I said, "What the fuck? What?"
Why are you asking me this question exactly?
I did a double take.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Where's this coming from?" And he goes, "Well, the bishop was interviewing me and asked me if I had any issues with bestiality." And boom, like,
Yeah.
that moment where I said, I snap. You can ask my kids, I snap. And I lost my shit. And I'm like, who goes to a kid of that age, a grown man, obviously in his 50s, behind a closed door, asking my son about something like that? I mean, like, and when my son's like, "What do you like? I don't know what that is." He laughed and said, "Okay, you don't have an issue with that."
Which
And
is just a
I
weird
had to have
question.
that conversation with my
Mm-hmm.
son, man. It really, like, at that point, there were things coming out about the church with bishops and leaders of the church molesting kids. They
Mm-hmm.
was on the, at the forefront. People were talking about these closed door interviews and how people had been getting away with all kinds of stuff. And it was really in the news at the time, and like very pointing
Well,
downwards for
yeah.
the church.
And this is around the same point in time that all the paperwork was released that you still have in possession, which were a lot of these reports that came out about what was going on. And of course, you had 4 young children, and you and Leslie had to make the decision: do we want to continue this?
Yeah, people were getting X'd for speaking out about issues that they had, experiences. I mean, the Boy Scouts, just look that up. The LDS Church and the Boy Scouts. That Boy Scout program is one and done because of the ongoing lawsuit with all the scouting program involved in the church and all the allegations that have come out with leaders in the church tied to Boy Scout positions molesting kids.
Yeah.
And there's a huge settlement and a payout going to those individuals, right? And like, I don't want to go down that
Yeah.
rabbit hole and take more time, but at that point we were at our low. We were at our lowest point. And then my brother-in-law, my 2 brother-in-laws, one in their so Leslie's brother-in-law, he's an attorney, and my Leslie's brother, who was in the bishopric, he was a counselor to a bishop high up in the church. They had both presented me with some documentation called the CES letter. And if you go look that up, it's called cesletter.org. And it's like an 80-page essay about a guy who lived his life to a T. He's deaf. He was deaf growing up, and just a very articulate, young, bright mind that had a grandpa that worked for the church education system. And he had all these shelf breaking items and wrote an essay because his family just said, "Well, send it to grandpa and they'll get it to the right people to have them answer a lot of the questions that you're struggling with." And he never got a response. And he was persistent on getting a response and getting a response. And he put that essay, basically, at the time it was 80 something pages. He put that out there with cross references to things that I had struggled with, all this new information that I didn't know. And people were fact checking all this stuff. And lo and behold, it's on the church's site to back up everything that this guy was writing about, but hidden behind the scenes so that it wasn't at the forefront. So a lot of the doctrine that I was taught in the LDS church growing up, the posters that I saw of, the Angel Moroni and all this stuff about the plates and the Book of Mormon and the translation of the Book of Mormon and how they used a Urim and Thummim and this compass to translate everything. It was done out of a rock and a fucking hat. It was done out of a fucking seer stone. And when you go and you look up the Book of Mormon, it was plagiarized, a lot of it, from from a book that came out way before that transcription.
And so you were seeing these things, you were reading these papers, which, by the way, the reason that they were created is because people were having issues with losing their faith within the church. And he was told directly from some higher member in the church, write down your concerns, write down your grievances.
Yes.
And he did. And he sent it in, and they didn't respond to him. So in 2013, when it was only 86 pages, as Jay had said, he had published it. And then it had grown because people read it and they had related to it. They were like, look, we want out of the church too. We're just scared because, like we said earlier, people were afraid that their families weren't going to love them, that their friends were going to turn their back on them, that a lot of people, the church was their entire livelihood and their entire life to that point.
Spot on. I mean, like, people have lineage of the pioneers that settled here in Utah. Like, they're in their families, like, and the tradition and the culture out here, like, you're rooted deep into this. I mean, this is like another level. And so you start showing signs of breaking away from your faith or whatever. I mean, it's another level. Like, people lose their families, people take their lives. There's been plenty of people that have taken their life that have come to the realization that this has all been a fraud when they get into that rabbit hole and they go down and they look at how, and I'm just getting to the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
I just shared like 2 little things in there. You can go through there, you can cross check it, and anyone that has any kind of scripture experience like I had at the time, dude, your mind is blown. I mean, this isn't just this is not anti-Mormon literature. And I'm telling anyone that's watching this show, if you're happy being LDS and you're a Mormon, do not go down that rabbit hole. If you want to stay true to your faith, do not go and look that up and read that essay, because you will live in a fog for a while. It will mess you up.
Build a lot of questions, and a lot of concerns. And so you read this, Jay, and obviously you and Leslie had come together and had the discussion of, what do we do for our family? And you sat the kids down, and some of them were still very young at this point, and you said, hey guys, what do we want to do as a family? Can you pick it up from there?
Yeah, so we read it. Both Leslie and I looked at each other and we're like, we're done. Like our minds are blown, and we're just trying to cope with, like, how do we even live our lives? What do we even believe? Our kids are baptized in this, everyone, like I said, minus my littlest, and we didn't know what to do. So I immediately went out online. I found an Exmo Reddit with thousands and thousands of people. When I joined it, there was only a few thousand. Now it's taken off. There's a whole community out there to let you know that, like, hey, take it easy. Like, we got you. They do meetups, kind of like AA almost. Like they meet up at a area just to talk about how their lives have changed. Like, there's men and women that have lost their families. Like, they come out, it's almost like coming out, like if you were gay or something. They tell them that, like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I believe now. This is what I've discovered. And then when their partner or other family member doesn't buy in or hasn't gone down that study and that rabbit hole, they bounce on them and they lose everything. And so the way that we handled that is we pulled the family together. We told them what happened. And, I turned to my kids. I'll never forget that discussion I had with them. And they were like, it's okay. It's okay. Like, we believe you. And like, they weren't so, I mean, they had their own issues and doubts with things, and they were like, it's all right. And some of them didn't even want to go to church. We felt like we were pulling them by the arm, like my parents were with me. Right. And I didn't want to guilt them into it anymore.
Yeah.
Might be a relief to at least a couple.
Yeah.
And so now we're quite a few years removed, and we could do several more hours talking about this. And I know I have to be the bad guy and speed us up, and I feel bad on one hand, but on the other hand, we don't want to keep you, Jay, for too long. The way that we tend to end the show, and Landon, do you have anything that you want to ask before we do final thoughts?
Yeah, I just got one question, kind of to wrap this all up with a bow. And I'm just curious, where you stand now with your beliefs.
Yeah, so love is my religion. I think I told you that, it, I find it harder to be a dick
Yeah.
than to be a nice guy. And I hope Dylan and my boys
Yeah. It's all right, buddy.
online can vouch for me on that
Yeah.
because I care. And I care about people to the point where I get screwed a lot just being the nice guys finish last. I wear my heart on my sleeve. As you can see, I'm an emotional dude with this kind of stuff. And this day and age, there's a lot of bullying online, cruel people,
Yeah.
and so I've raised my family to be lions,
Yeah.
and to protect others and to love people for who they are. And if someone sees, you know, someone getting bullied at school, you better be the dude that steps in and helps them out, and you do the right thing in your business dealings. You treat people the way that they should be treated, and you get what you get in return, and that's it. It's basically the golden rule. Because if there is a God,
Yeah.
that's what God would want you to do. And if there isn't a God, then hopefully you left a legacy and left an
Yeah.
example for everybody to know that you were a great person.
So we always do show with our final thoughts. Landon, I'll start with you. What are your final thoughts for the day?
Yeah, I think that we need to do this more often than every 2
Yeah.
years, Jay. It's there's you know
There's so much we didn't get to.
right, there's I mean, we barely scratched the surface on
Yeah.
on some of this stuff. So,
We rolled through fast, and I apologize to, I forget his name, but Blackjack Army. You have me laughing inside at all the
He
comments. I
does
saw
great.
all of them.
He's a
And
good
yeah,
friend.
the cleaning the green and all of that stuff, and yeah, if I could kill some of these child molesters and get them off the street, I mean, make no mistake that like I would love to change the laws around that kind of stuff when proven. I wish we could just destroy individuals like that because they destroy the lives of great young people and minds, and I
yep.
hate I hate people like that.
So Landon, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it comes down to kind of what Jay said. Just be a nice person. I really love conversations like this where, to some degree, I think that I had it tough at certain points, and then you hear this kind of thing, and you're like, "Holy shit!" My religious experience wasn't even 2 days of what Jay had to go through.
Yeah.
And there's people all over the world that go through this every single day. Um,
Every day. I mean, the shit that I hear going on in our public school systems and with our young people out there. And like I said, that's why I've been passionate. That's why I raised a wrestler. That's why I have a son that's a Marine, and not just a Marine,
Yeah.
an infantry, an 0311 OG, that's done tours, because they know how I feel coming up in that. And I brag them up. And my daughters are beasts. They're lionesses, and they're not sheep. You know, these guys are warriors, and that's what we need, because we need good people standing up for the less fortunate, because not everybody can do certain things. They have talents in other areas, but with what my kids have been blessed with, the deal, man. and
Yeah.
and it weighs heavy on me and my wife and my kids, and like, it crushes my soul to see our people preyed upon,
oh, yeah.
and that's
So,
real,
so Jay, final thoughts, any message that you have, even if it's a personal one for your kids, for Leslie, if it's for the viewers at large, just, whatever your message is, you're going away here. What do you got for us?
I love you. I love you.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you. I love you for who you are, and and it doesn't matter what religion you are. And like I said, just because we talked about my crisis that I had and my experience, it doesn't make the LDS church all bad. There's a lot of good that comes from that. I am not anti. I am all pro living the golden rule, and doing the right thing. And I think if everybody, forget religion, you and Landon, you said it best in our last show, that if everybody just lived a life of being kind to one another, this would be a much better place. You don't need religion to do that. Let that be your religion if you want to call it a religion. That's the message I leave with you, is that love. Love people for who they are. It doesn't matter. And if they're a dick and they haven't caused you any kind of harm, walk away.
Yeah.
It's a different story. If they've caused you or your family harm, that's another story.
Yeah.
And blackjack, we won't get into that.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you need kindness and you need community. And I think those of us that have made it out of this on the other side need to be there for those that still need to come out from the other side. So I think don't sit in silence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Reach out.
I guess we end with my final thoughts. So my final thoughts are this. First off, to everyone who's new, who's never watched our programs before, this is different than our regular shows, but we're definitely going to do more of these, do more of a talk-based show, and we thank you for the love and support the Blackjack Army. And Jay, I'm sure you're going to share this to a bunch of people, and I'm sure some of your family are watching live. We thank you. We also, Landon, Jay, thank you guys for your bravery talking about your exit from your different churches. It is something that takes a lot of bravery, and I appreciate you guys sharing your story with the audience. I'll end this with my religious sentiments. I don't know if there's a God, but if there is, I hope that he's a kind, forgiving God. I hope that he's just, and I hope that he understands that some of the guys that they wrote about in this book, man, they didn't own Bibles, and they, I guess, ended up just fine. So maybe there's something for all of us. Maybe we'll all end up just fine. We all had our reason. Thank you, everybody. Take care. We appreciate you spending your Thursday night with us. We'll see you Saturday for a regular program on Amy Fisher. Getting back to the good old killer murder ghostly content.
Right,
and
back to the crimes.
Jay, thank you so much.
Thanks to Jay. Thanks to everybody that came out and is watching this comment. And I did want to say that there's a lot of people in here. This has been just like last time, one of the more successful ones for sure. Shout out to James. He's in here for the first time. John, Anthony, Mike, all of y'all, thank you so much. Jay, like I said, let's do this again.
Yeah, anytime. And if anybody needs to talk or anything, I'm always available. And yeah, God bless. If you believe in God, and if you don't believe in God, be well and do the right thing, man. Do the right thing. So thank you.
Good night, everyone. Take care.